This is the third week of Advent. It's hard to believe we've already made it this far. Advent is our journey to Christmas. It reminds us of the rebirth of the Christ energy, the divine spark within each of us. And so we start by lighting our candles. We light our first candle for faith. We light the second candle for peace. And we light the third candle this week for love. And like I said last week, love is one of those words that has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. It's complicated, like peace. And when we think about love in the context of Christmas, we often attribute love to Mary. Seems pretty obvious. And poor Joseph is sort of a side note to the whole story, but he represents wisdom. And love and wisdom together bring forth the divine spark. Actually works out pretty well. But let's talk about this story. As I said 2 weeks ago, we don't know a whole lot about the wise men or wise ones or magi that came from the east. And there's a lot that we know that we don't know, or a lot that we think we might know about the Christmas story, which isn't quite what you think the story says. So, now, I know for some people that 100% belief, word for word, of what it says in the Bible is what is required for them to have strong faith. But this is not how we see the Bible in Unity. We're interested in the symbolic meanings. We're interested in the understanding the context of the time. What did that mean then? Can you imagine? I mean, just think of the things that we say now that 30 years ago wouldn't have made sense, or vice versa. So imagine us trying to understand what somebody was saying 2,000 years ago without taking that into account. And then we also are really interested in what the stories in the Bible mean to us now. How can we apply that truth, the underlying truth that we find there, to our own lives? And these stories have stood the test of time because there's something meaningful in them. Even as we learn the backstory, and for some people, understanding that stuff is very healing, and they have these great revelations. We have to acknowledge that many of us also have deep connections to the rituals around, especially around Christmas time, even if we understand that theologically they're kind of not quite exactly what we think. It's just sort of one of these things that we deal with this time of year. And there's nothing wrong with that. But let's look at the story. Let's do a little bit of, let's put our thinking hats on and learn a little bit more about this. So, according to Marcus Borg, who's one of the big Bible scholar guy, he knows his stuff. The first 2 chapters of Matthew, which is where we see the birth story, we see reference to prophecy fulfillment 5 times in 2 chapters. That's a lot. Matthew, not that it was actually written by the Apostle Matthew, just to be clear, it was written by somebody later on. They said it was Matthew. Matthew was writing in a time where the Jews who believed in Jesus were being ostracized by mainstream Judaism. And so a lot of Matthew is about proving that Jesus was the guy that they were waiting for, and trying to show the Jews that they didn't get it, right? So that's like kind of the underlying context of what was happening in Matthew. Just like, you know, when you write a letter to somebody, maybe you're saying something without actually saying it, right? So that's what Matthew was kind of saying in that. And that's important to know when we read it. So when we know that bias, we look at all these references back to prophecy, and we And you make you wonder how much the story was written to fill the prophecies. Because, so like, for instance, Bethlehem was known as the city of David, the ancestral king. And many scholars believe that Jesus was probably born in Nazareth. There was actually no reason for the census that they talk about, and part of the origin story didn't happen at that time. And you wouldn't have gone back to your ancestral home. You would have been counted wherever you had property. It's like property taxes. You get counted where you're at, not like where you're from. Makes sense. And Mary wouldn't have had to go because women didn't count at the time. So that's the whole thing is probably silly, but we're going to still sing songs about Bethlehem because that's tradition and we like to do it. But it's good to know that that's probably not how it happened. And so here's another fun thing. Let me just throw it all out. And then I'm going to bring it back around to what it means to us and how we can have that connection, heart connection, I promise. So another one of those truth stretchings done by the writer of Matthew. Okay, so here's the other, before we get to that. Most of the time, first of all, they didn't have Instagram back then, right? So they didn't know necessarily that all this wonderful stuff was going to be happening by this one guy. So it was common at the time for the birth story of someone wonderful to be written way after the fact to make it sound wonderful. It was normal. That's what they did. So it's good to remember that too. So back to the virgin birth. Dun, dun, dun. This is a reference back, good old Matthew, to the story of Moses. And it's not even a very good reference back. But that's what he's referencing. 2,000 years ago, a betrothed couple, like Mary and Joseph, may have gone to live with his family, or he may have gone to live with her family. That was a very normal thing to do as they were already betrothed. And so they may have already been having relations. Also not uncommon at the time. But this doesn't work if you need Jesus to be extraordinary to prove he's the one, as Matthew's writer did. And so it also doesn't work if you need your theology to emphasize that Jesus was the great exception. If you need that to happen, if you need Jesus to be extra special, then obviously he needs to have virgin birth, God is your daddy, the whole thing. Now, I believe that Jesus was the great example, not the great exception. So for me, it works better for Jesus to have regular beginnings, just like I did. But if Mary conceived Jesus the regular way, does that make her love any less extraordinary? Does it mean that Joseph and his dedication to her was any less beautiful? I don't think so. Being a parent or a caregiver is a continual act of love, one that never ends. And can you imagine being Mary and knowing your firstborn is different? And seeing the effect that he has on people, even as a child, feeling afraid for him as he attracts the attention of authorities, and continuing by his side through everything. That's pretty extraordinary. And at the same time, it's the ordinary love of somebody we have for someone we care about. It's both. And so, does it really matter where he got his Y chromosome? I don't think so. But I'm not attached to that. I know for some people it does matter. And we can imagine, even though we don't hear a whole lot about Joseph, that his influence also shows up in the person that Jesus becomes. Whether he was the biological father or not, he certainly did his part. Even if he's kind of a bit player. So here's the other thing. There's this whole section at the beginning of, is it Matthew? Of Matthew, where it explains the lineage of Joseph and how he's connected to David and the lineage and all how that's important. I'm like, okay, but if he's not supposed to be the father, why does it matter? Okay? So, since we're not going to get a DNA test on it, it doesn't really matter. But, like I said, for some people it does, for others it doesn't. For me, the essence of the story is love. And that's what matters. Yesterday I was at I went to the Human Rights Vigil downtown. And there was speakers on various aspects of human rights. And one of them said that the first thing that we can all do to help is to respond with compassion. She said as long as your idea of compassion is somewhat within the normal range, you're on the right track. And so how do we respond with love and compassion? That's what I'm all about. How do we do that more? How do we stand from a steadfast love like Mary? How do we respond with compassion in the face of adversity? Practice, persistence, and prayer. Now they say you have to put 10,000 hours into something to become an expert. You probably may have heard that number before. Now I'm guessing that's an average. Some things you probably can do an expert faster than others. But it's helpful to remember that you have to practice a lot to get really good at something. In case you were wondering, I crunched the numbers. If you practiced 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, it would take over 19 hours to reach 10,000 hours of practice. And even if you did 40 hours a week, it would still take 5 years. That's a lot. That's a lot of practice. That's a lot of doing something. And so we get distracted or discouraged sometimes when we don't act in our most Christ-like way sometimes. It's notice, practice, do better. You know, when you miss the wrong note when you're playing, you know, your instruments or your, you know, practice football players doing their hitting the ball, you know, I mean, it takes a lot of practice to get it right, and they still make goof ups. It's okay. Get back on track. So if we have the intention to be more loving and peaceful and kind, and we do make strides, and it will take time, which gets us to persistence. Don't give up on a good idea. This time of year, we see people opening up their hearts and sharing their talents and their treasures to help others. Like I said, we did a great job with the gift drive for Santa for Senior and the food drive. It's great. We're showing a lot of love for people that we don't know. But I think the harder practice is actually showing love for people we do know or we think we know. So the family member or the neighbor that pushes all your buttons. Or maybe it's a public figure or a policy even. How do we call on our inner Mary, which is love, and our inner Joseph, which is wisdom, to respond in a Christ-like manner to whatever comes at us? How? Practice, persistence. And the thing that supercharges your practice? Prayer, of course. Prayer is the kick it up a notch, that extra dash of spice at the end. When we take that time, I know I say it all the time, when we center in the truth of who we are and who we came here to be, it helps us get a bigger picture. You know, instead of in the minutia of the thing that the person did, when we zoom back, you know, and say, there's only love here. I'm here in the presence of God. Whatever it is that's the affirmation, the mantra that will help you get there, and you zoom back out a little bit, you realize that that's just a little blip in the bigger, scheme of your day, of your week, or your whatever. Doesn't mean that you need to be okay with being mistreated or something, but it helps us have more grace, helps us have more peace, and not, make that the drama that plays out for the rest of your day or the rest of your week. Okay, it happened, move on, next. It's not the story I want to tell. And so when we take that time in prayer, it helps us be able to smooth the edges. And the more we do it, the more we smooth the edges. And we probably all come across somebody in our lifetimes that just seem to have that grace about them. They probably have a prayer practice. I'm just saying, that's how it works. And so we use that. And, according to the story, we know that it's a good story. But the angel came to Mary and told her the whole plan of what was going to happen. And she agreed. That's something that people forget. She said yes. According to Scripture, she said yes. She got a choice. I don't know if you really feel like you necessarily have a choice when the angel arrives and says, by the way, you're going to do this really great thing. But she did say yes. She said, my soul magnifies the Lord. I'm in. She said yes out of love for God. And, all of us have that divine spark within us. And Mary decided in that moment to say yes to letting her spark shine bright. And there's moments for all of us where we get to say yes to shining our lights a little more brightly. And then we get another chance to shine our light a little more brightly. And another chance, and another chance. These are the moments we all get to say yes to being more love, to being brighter, to being that love and light that's expressing through you. Like our affirmation from Daily Word today, God loves through me. So, let Mary be an example. Not of an unattainable perfection that's all wrapped up in doctrine and a level of behavior that's probably not realistic. Let her be instead an example of how an ordinary person can say yes to being more love. And then you continue to say yes throughout your lifetime. That's a story I can believe in.